Is that in 2019 we will be $16.5 million over the current 2012-22 target. That means that if council wishes to address that, it needs to move out $5.6 million of capital expenditure and other costs in 2018, and a further $11 million effectively in 2019. It is a cumulative amount. It is not to be added together. I know that some media reports, for example, actually had those figures added together, adding up to over $50 million. So,
right, Councillor O'Leary.
Just a question of clarification. We're still working on the draft budget. On page 7 of that agenda, that graph that is figure 5.
Sorry, Andrew.
So it actually is in, it still is in the draft budget.
Page 7, figure 2. Is that what you're looking at in the supplementary?
No, not in the supplementary. In the draft
The original
document that
on
we're
the
still
agenda
working with.
Sorry, we just
Yes.
need to get clear where you're looking on
Yeah.
at the agenda
that
on December. Sorry,
Yeah.
just what page?
Page 7,
Page 7.
figure 5.
Page 7, figure 5 on the agenda from December. Yep.
The graph is in there. I mean,
they will be slightly
so
out of date.
that will be, yeah, but so, I mean, that's the draft document proposal at the moment that you're intending on putting out. So you have put it in the document that's...
I do apologise
It's
for
just not
Councillor
in the
King, though.
supplementary.
It would have been helpful to have both of those graphs there
Yeah.
for
You know
consistency.
what I'm saying?
You just produced them.
We'll get them produced.
Yeah, so they're just going to print it out, Councillor Gallagher. Yeah. So your point, Councillor, is already in the papers, which is right. It is already.
Well, it's not accurate.
No, it's not
No,
been
no.
updated. Yeah, that's right.
And it clearly states in their supplementary paper that the same metrics and graphs will be presented to us.
Yeah, no, Councillor
And
King,
they
that's right. And I think the CFO said, yep, agree. I'll get it printed out. All right. Any other questions? No? All right.
Just one more question. When you were doing your budgets, did you take into account the political risk that was going with the change in the budget?
We were definitely aware of the reputational risk to council, particularly if, for example, we had asset failures that were foreseeable. But obviously, political risk is also for politicians to consider. So I suspect this question's getting into the political realm.
Question.
Yes, Councillor Gallagher.
Richard, in terms of wherever this lands as a plan, have you started to do some script so that there's an explanation to relate back to the pre-election forecast presented by staff? And that pre-election forecast was based on a number of candidates at the last election promising or implying that debt would be capped at 440 million. Have we looked at some wording? Because obviously what I'm trying to do is the wording of the gap between the pre-election forecast to the proposed budget in terms of those debt ratios.
You're raising a number of points, Councillor Gallagher, so through you, Your Worship. So firstly, the pre-election report was a report that was developed to be specifically pinned back to audited information. So we were required to report back based on the audited actuals to a certain point in time and to the 2012-22 10-year plan. So at that point in time, we understand clearly what information was included, so we manage that aspect. In terms of the 440, that was, and we've already started the communication behind this. We talked about it at the meeting on the 9th and 10th of December. The 440 was a numerical representation of the debt to revenue ratio, and it was something that was easy to communicate without having to explain the context behind it. But since then, we have explained through to council and also to the media that the 2012-22 10-year plan was premised on achieving a 200% debt to revenue ratio by 2019. And I think the CFO has articulated why we're moving from that to a recommendation that suggests
So,
to any
so
to easily.
that could be actually put as part of the potential, this council could resolve to put all of that record or a summary of that record into the draft LTP going out to consultation, an explanation, as you've just said.
We are required from a consultation document to put major matters within the consultation document, and our financial strategy is one of our major matters, so we'd have to talk to that financial strategy within the consultation document.
Okay, any other questions? Right, next part, thanks.
Councillors, I'll now talk about options 1 and 2. I'll just switch back to the presentation.
So this is on page 9 of the supplementary report.
Council may also like to refer to page 10 in the supplementary paper, which has a table which highlights, with some traffic lights, the impact of selecting option 1 and then option 2. I'll talk to option 1 first. Management have identified 26 candidate items, and these were items where, after due consideration, we felt could be considered by council, as opposed to ones that, due to the risk associated with them, we're getting into the realms of highly undue risk. So,
Excuse me, Paul, just to clarify, the green, when you've got a green going across, on all 3 options, why have you put it in there?
I'll come back to that if I may,
Okay.
Councillor Mallard. I was talking about the process that we got to for the candidate items first. These 26 candidate items were then ranked into order based on how discretionary, to an extent, management felt they were, but also the likely priority that we could put against them, and the ability to delay them. So, for example, community assistance funding is a discretionary activity of council, whereas some of the other activities are less discretionary.
That's a bit like the Rogers Rose Garden, isn't it?
Sorry, Councillor Gallagher, I'm not sure of the history.
I think
No,
other
it
staff
doesn't,
members.
doesn't need an answer.
I think
thanks,
other staff members
CFO.
would understand what
Yeah.
I allude to.
When we tested the model to actually arrive at the 200% target for option 1, we went down and put in all of the items as per the priority until we reached the point where we had reached the target. So to reach the target of 200% by 2019, we had to go down to item number 19. That was the large item, and it actually swung the dial, if you like, at that point. It was so large, in fact, that it allowed us to then go back and put in items that are showing in green and would remain funded as a result. If we had selected all of those items, we would have actually taken more than we needed to out, and therefore we put back some items where we could. Similarly with option 2, by the time we swung the dial at item number 21, there was an ability to put a limited number back into the process. But council could consider to take it on a strict ranking order and go straight down to number 21 in option 2 and have all of those items actually deferred. Just to clarify the colours, green means it remains funded. The lighter colour, an amber sort of colour, means that it is deferred, and the reddish colour means that it would be unfunded in that particular option. So option 1 brings us back to reaching a debt target in 2019, as shown on the graph up on the table, up on the presentation, which is also available. If we can print that one for you as well. Option 2 brings us to a $440 million debt cap. I'll just leave that one up for a moment. So you can see there we reached 200% in 2019, and then we see the gap or the wedge that we have indicated in all of our planning towards the end in 2025, allowing consideration of some unfunded projects. In option 2, we have a hard debt cap of $440 million. The 200% line becomes irrelevant at that point, and therefore debt continues to be constrained. Because this graph is on a percentage basis, the 440 is a reducing percentage and gets down towards 160% of revenue by 2025.
So just on that, so what you're saying is the gap between the red line and the green in option 2 is unavailable.
That's
to
right.
maintain that cap. Okay. Right. Okay. Right. Is it any other?
Okay, I'm happy to take questions on those, and I can put up the other graph for Councillor King, and we can arrange for that to be printed as well.
Okay. Good. All right. Questions on option 1 or 2?
Councillors will have read in their paper the attachment which has those candidates in more detail along with their risks. That's towards the rear of the paper in the fold-outs.
So this is this attachment to the paper, candidate items for deferral or removal. Okay, with more detail. Right. Okay.
And
Any-
generic risks are discussed at paragraph 5.11.
Yep.
So-
Councillor Mallett?
And I know we've discussed this previously, Paul, so for example, on option 1, if we cut number 19, Rotokauri Industrial Growth Program, we can still, we don't need to cut wastewater treatment, is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
So,
But what
so,
about- oh.
so just to clarify that, up until the point where I had reached number 18
Yep.
and included 18, I did not have enough to actually hit the target. When I included candidate item number 19, I had more than enough to hit that target, therefore I put the other ones back. What I was trying to do was minimise the number of items that council would have to defer or unfund.
So you're saying up until the time you had done 19, we had to take the 5% reduction in Three Waters out as well?
Even with all 1 to 18, I
Yep.
did not hit the target. So it was only
okay.
when I reached 19 that I actually hit the target. And as per the feedback from both yourself and Councillor Pascoe in
Yeah.
those meetings, we wanted to minimise
Yep.
the
The
number
cuts.
of items that we were actually reducing.
Right, any questions on these? No?
So option 1 is exactly what we have resolved to do at the moment. That's where we are for the last 4 years. That's where we've been running.
So that would be consistent with the 2012 financial strategy, and under that you would not have to amend for the 2015 financial strategy. That's correct.
Which this council approved again this time last year.
For the annual plan?
For the annual plan.
No, because there's different items come in, so can someone explain that?
As far as the debt ratio and as far as the rates cap went.
I was
that's right.
unaware of any discussion on the financial strategy as part of the
So,
annual plan.
Claire, can you just?
This is the first discussion that this council's had of the 2015 financial strategy. So the 2014-15 annual plan was the final year of the 2012 long-term plan process. So this is your first opportunity to update the financial strategy to reflect the new circumstances which the council looks ahead at, which is what the CFO and CEO are proposing or recommending to council. So this is your first opportunity to update the financial strategy.
Thank you.
Just clarify too, the capital program from the 2012 to the capital program for this draft, there are differences as more information comes available or other things change. So it's not just taking that one and putting it there. That's right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That comes back to my
Because-
comment of more and sooner as a result of the
Information comes
that-
up
that
as
you've
the
now
management
got.
plan's completed.
That's right.
Yeah, just so that we know it's not like for like. Okay, good. Yeah. Right, sorry,
Yeah, can
Councillor
we
Gallagher,
just,
yes?
I want to go back to that pre-election strategy, and we'll put aside the statements arrayed in this community around the $440 million cap, which are in writing and a clear one out there on election. Let's go back to the 200%. What I want to just get my head around, and you may have partially answered it, when we talked 12, 13 months ago about 200% ratio, pre-election strategy document, I don't recall any statement that we were going to chop community assistance funding. With the rest, were they actually in that strategy? They weren't included, they were unfunded? Do I take it the rest were unfunded? You see what I mean? I'm just trying to see what I'm trying to find out here is the journey in 13, 14 months. Well, we went out and said 200%, some of us said $440 million, and then suddenly 13, 14 months later to achieve that, we have to do this.
I think Councillor Gallagher's questions about what's actually on the capital expenditure budget.
What was on, yeah.
Because, you know, how, I think what he's saying is how do we get to these items being out? But I think the question is more about how do they become in. So, can Blair, is that a question for you or Chris on that? And I think then the supplementary question, if I could paraphrase Councillor Gallagher's, then, you know, why is community assistance funding on this? Which I think the answer is because something's got to come out. And so that's the one that's been picked. We don't have to agree with that, of course.
I think the important point is that the 2015 long-term plan starts again. So it is an entirely new long-term plan process. In fact, it's a 30-year horizon. And it is constructed from asset management plans that the CFO said are consistently been updated. And of course, these asset management plans are now reflecting the latest information, including the latest growth projections that we have, which are different to the 2012 growth projections. So it is a start again capital program based on the latest information from asset management plans and growth projections. And so that is why you are seeing a number of differences, projects timing, projects quantum, new items to reflect the new circumstances. So this is entirely appropriate for council to update its financial strategy and its long-term projections and capital program based on the latest information, which is what is in front of you today.
But just so I've got this right, which of those items have you put in or are now in that weren't in to deal with growth? You see what I mean? I'm just trying to...
There's a significant number, and Chris could probably talk to some examples.
That would be helpful.
As a general answer, I think you'll find the quantum and timing of some of our investment in our core infrastructure has been brought forward into the earlier years of the program and what it was anticipated in 2012. That's probably a result of our improved asset management planning and knowledge of our network. A big tool for us was the hydraulic water model and giving us a better understanding of the state of our assets. So I think in general you'll find that the investment in some of our core infrastructure at the really high strategic level, the plants and the interceptors is happening a little bit earlier than anticipated in 2012. I think you'll find that's probably the main reason.
Okay. Right, Councillor Forsyth.
This is a question for the CFO. On table 4, the items 8, 9, where it doesn't matter which option we choose, whether it's the draft option 1 or 2, you've selected the Seddon Park light tower shrouds, whatever they might be, and Waikato Stadium as, along with a couple of others at the bottom, Peacock's growth, so 22, 23, 24. When you're weighing up those candidate options, I think as you call them, why have you chosen or nominated 8 and 9? I understand the water program, but why have you chosen 8 and 9 to be funded regardless of either option?
Yeah, it's a combination of reasons. There is the ability to put it back, but also the timing that those particular projects may have had within the schedule. So, for example, if once we reach the target, we often find that we can put things back in later years, and those items may have been sitting in those later years, whereas, for example, the camera option was one of the items in the earlier years, so there was no ability to put that back without actually affecting the target.
So, sorry, that sounded a bit confusing. Is it because when you looked at those items, 1 to whatever 19 you're there, did you look at the timing of them in the draft you're recommending and whether you could actually take them out or put them back in because of timing. Have I heard you
Both
right?
timing and the quantum of the dollars, that's correct.
Right, so two things went into that selection, Councillor Forsyth. The timing that they'd originally put them into the program
Okay,
and the amount.
can you explain that a little bit more, in
Yeah.
more detail for me then regarding 8 and 9?
So for example, the seat replacements at Waikato Stadium are towards the end of the plan. So once we have achieved the target, we found that there was enough money left in towards the end of the plan by picking the last large item. So if we take item number 19 in option 1,
Yes.
when we picked that large item, we then had enough room in later years to do some changes, to put items back. But we did not have money in the early years to put funds back at that stage.
Yeah,
Okay, and the same applies for the light, for the Seaton Park light
That's right.
shroud.
right,
Just tell me what that is again.
yeah.
The light shrouds are and I apologise, this may in fact be Waikato Stadium lights. Sean?
No,
Is that a type? Sorry.
Number item 8, is it
Item
Waikato
8.
or Seddon?
Is that Waikato or Stadium?
Waikato Stadium.
Sorry, my apologies. That's Waikato Stadium light tower shrouds. Those are the shrouds that go around the lights and allow the lights to work more effectively for TV cameras.
Okay,
So just because Councillor Forsyth's questions, I think, a fairly straightforward one, are you saying that the reason that you were able to put them back in after 19 had to go in to meet the threshold was their timing on the draft budget you're recommending?
That's correct.
You couldn't put things from the earlier years in because the numbers wouldn't work, is that?
It was very difficult to put anything from the
Right,
earlier years.
okay.
kind of fitting the right thing in the right.
Right
Yeah,
time.
that's right.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. All right, that was a good question.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on options 1 or 2? No? Right, councillors, so I'm intending at this point to determine which option, because that will make it a lot easier as we work through, and then we will do a final resolution at the end. So we have we have 3 options, if you like. Option 1, or the draft budget. So the draft budget is the budget the staff have presented, which is an update on the December one, and that is represented on page 10 on the first column, the green lights. And then we have option 1 and option 2. So I'm looking for a motion. Councillor Pascoe.
I'm happy to move the recommendations on page number 3, items 1 through to 4.
Are we okay to do that? Yep.
Do you have a seconder?
Yes.
Okay.
Seconded by Councillor Forsyth.
No, thank you.
Can we put that up on the screen? I just need to check with the CFO. Is that, can we resolve all of that together, or do you want us to do it in bits? Because I'm just conscious of fees and charges and things like that as well. Was this a recommendation, a catch-all at the end? Are we better just to...
This is more the catch-all at the end. It may be better to resolve in
Which-
relation to which option at this
Right.
point, and then pick up all of them, a catch-all at the end.
Right.
Sorry.
So, Councillor Pascoe, just for clarification, what we're hearing from the CFO is that this resolution needs to relate to the specific choice of the draft budget recommended by the staff, or option 1 or option 2. So am I to read your resolution as moving the draft budget presented by the staff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Can we have some words up, please?
Presented by the staff.
The noting the uniform change target or not be included. Yep, that sounds fine. Yep. Did you, you want my seconder to look at that too?
I've just put it up on the screen.
Put it up on the screen so you can...
Yeah, that's fine. I can hear you anyway.
So what are we resolving? That is a, I don't understand.
Which budget it is?
Within the supplementary paper, it's referring the staff budget as the draft budget, so that's why it refers to the draft budget twice.
Okay, but what are we resolving to accept that? So is it to accept
Maybe we need to be a little
as
more
based
specific.
on, is it to accept the draft 10-year plan budget as based on the draft budget presented in the supplementary report? Is that what it's saying? 'Cause it doesn't have a doing word. I think that's what it's supposed to say. Yeah, to accept.
Yeah.
The reason the last sentence is there is that the draft budget does not include a targeted rate for the recycling, and we did pass a resolution at the last session of this meeting that we would, by including that statement at the end, note that uniform charge targeted for increased recycling not be included, it actually removes that targeted rate and supplements the initial resolution to no longer standing on books.
Can you repeat that last bit again so I couldn't hear you?
My apologies. I'll explain that again. So the last sentence there, noting that the uniform charge targeted rate for increased recycling not be included. At the earlier session of this meeting, we had a resolution on the card for a targeted rate for recycling. It was resolved by this council. The draft budgets presented does not include a targeted rate for recycling. So that sentence at the end of this recommendation effectively rescinds that original resolution.
So what does that do to the budget
It doesn't do anything to the budget. This budget was prepared
without?
without it, and we're just doing this to tidy up the resolutions more than anything, councillors.
So any further discussion then on those wheelie bins will take place after and will be added if resolved
Yep, so
on top of the 3.8?
within the draft budget, the wheelie bin costs are included.
Yes.
So they're in year 3, I think year 3, but there is no separate targeted rate to recover the costs if this resolution is adopted. And that's what the draft budget as presented by staff represents.
Right, any other questions? So I just first of all want to just check, Councillor Pascoe and Councillor Forsyth, does that represent what you want to resolve?
I'm just a little bit unsure as to whether it's clear, but then the other alternatives are labelled in the supplementary report as alternative. Just one.
Page 7.
Alternative budget options. So
They're called option 1 and option 2.
yeah, but the heading. I mean, I guess we could be a little confused here as to which of the budgets we're approving, which of the budgets we're accepting.
So what do you suggest? As recommended by the
I
staff,
wonder
is
if
it?
after 2015 to 25, as opposed to the alternative budget.
Well, is it better to say as recommended by the staff?
Based on the staff recommended
as-
draft budget.
as recommend- okay.
Would that be clear?
Yep, yep,
I see what
okay,
your point is.
Yes, yep, no, that's better.
Okay.
Yep.
Just,
Right, sorry, yes.
You happy with that, Margaret?
yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
As well.
So-
Just one more question for clarity. While there is reference to the targeted rate for the wheelie bins at the bottom, do we not need to mention the targeted rate for the Hamilton Gardens as well?
No, you'd actually mention that when the rates are set, struck. This assumes that the resolution that you already have around rates in relation to Hamilton Gardens continues. You have 4 years
Yes.
of that rate set at $10 per annum plus GST per household. That is already set, and this continues that.
Your Worship,
As long as that's
So I'm
clear.
getting to questions, yeah?
Yep.
So it doesn't need to be included? Oh, okay, all right. All right, so now I've got a list of people, so Councillor McPherson, Councillor O'Leary, who else? Councillor King? Yeah. Okay, Councillor McPherson?
just in terms of clarity about the change for the recycling, the uniform charge, my understanding is that council voted for that to be included on the basis that the funding, or at least part of the funding, would come from the uniform charge. Now it's proposed that all the funding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. CEO, comes from general rate collected in the years that it's operating. So isn't that something we should be discussing? It's almost a standalone thing, sure, it can be included if that's what people agree, but that's a different business proposition from the way it was presented to us in December.
Thank you, Councillor. When we originally had the meeting on the 9th and 10th of December, the budget that was presented, the first draft budget, did not include a targeted rate for the wheelie bins. And so the base premise was we would fund the costs of the wheelie bins. And then there was a discussion and a resolution it was included in the report as a recommendation to consider a targeted rate. And that was added on after the discussion to include it. So what we've done is only unwound back
I understand that as in terms of the paperwork,
Yep.
but in terms of the discussion at that meeting, because of your recommendation, the discussion was all about the targeted rate being able to fund this. And now that's it is a different proposition from what we discussed, even though the paperwork, the budget included, funding for it as out of general rates.
So I think, so I guess if that's the resolution moved and seconded, if you want, I understand what you're saying, if you wanted to have a separate discussion on that, because I think that's what you're saying. It might
possibly,
warrant-
Your Worship. I'm
not sure.
yeah.
But if you did, then you could move an amendment to say, well, that bit has to come out and be discussed separately. Would that be a better way to approach it, given that the mover and seconder are happy with that motion?
Yeah, I'm not even sure that they were focusing on that. They were focusing on the draft budget as recommended by staff, as an overall thing, rather than that specific one. So I'm just wondering if we could have a little more discussion on that.
I understand the CFO is saying that the draft budget presented in December included wheelie bins, because that was the feedback we had given through the review of the waste plan, funded. And then at the December meeting, there was a discussion about a uniform annual general charge, I think. Is that right? And a resolution. And in this paper, I'm reading that because the council meeting was adjourned and the original December draft budget was prepared not on that basis, on simply in the budget, this updated December budget has been prepared on the same basis. It's for clarity, I guess, and simplicity. Am I right?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yeah. Your Worship, my concern potentially is that perhaps if we had an opportunity to discuss that, people may say, well, look, we'd rather the allocation, the funds allocated for this out of the general rate, out for the waste collection, be spent on something else. Is this the highest priority for that dollop of funding? Because when we were discussing it before, we were all thinking, whether we supported or opposed it, that the funding would come over and above the general rate.
Yeah, so it was already in the draft budget in December, as presented by the staff. It was included as a funded item in that draft budget. The discussion in December was about the mechanism for funding it and whether it should be a different way.
Yeah, and had the mechanism, Your Worship, been a targeted UAC or something like that, then that wouldn't have affected, there would have left some funds free, if you like, in the budget to be spent on something else or on reducing debt or whatever.
Yes, I think what Councillor McPherson is saying, well, I'm not sure actually. We need some guidance on this, because I don't want to be bogged down by this, because I think what we're at a stage is we've got to pick an option to move on, and I'll get to you.
Sorry.
And you're saying, well, hold on, how are we going to deal with that aside from a draft budget?
Only
Because
that
it
aspect, yes.
May impact. Guidance?
Your Worship, I don't think it's been clearly explained by staff why they are saying now that the funding mechanism should not be a targeted rate.
Is another way around this just to take, I'm going to go back to the mover and seconder, because if they're happy with it, we'll just proceed. But just to kind of make sure that we've explored the issue you've raised, the other alternative is to simply take that out and deal with it later in this meeting as a separate item, which can be done. But it's up to the mover and the seconder.
That's exactly, Councillor Forsyth and I have privately discussed, that we move that we take that part of the,
So we'll take that out.
take that part out of the motion.
Okay, and we'll deal with that later in the meeting. Can someone make a note and we'll return back to that?
And therefore, Your Worship, depending on the outcome of that discussion, it may change the size of the draft budget in some years.
Yep. Okay, so mover and seconder, are you happy with that now? And we've got a note that we'll come back to that
That's correct.
item. Right, so I had Councillor O'Leary and I had Councillor King for questions.
It's been resolved now.
Answered. Councillor King?
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment,
Right, what's your amendment, please?
and that council accepts the current 2012-22 financial strategy target.
So is that your resolving option 1, are you? On page,
No, I don't want option 1 in the amendment. I wanted to read that council accepts the current 2012-22 financial strategy target.
okay, so have you had discussions prior to today then, Councillor King, about what that looks like? Because the staff were asked to go away and come back to us with what that would look like, and they've translated that in conjunction with meetings with Councillor Pascoe and Councillor Mallett into option 1. That's what it looks like, because councillors need to understand what that means. So are you not accepting option 1 and you want a different version to meet that?
The wording is the very wording under the heading 5.7 without the option 1 written in there. So it is the same wording.
5.7?
Current to 5.7.
Guidance here, please. So that would mean, just so that I'm understanding what you mean is then...
It means 5.7, everything that's under 5.7.
Yeah, no, I get that. What does that practically mean, though? Because the staff have presented a supplementary report to tell the councillors what that means on the ground. This is in and this is out.
It practically means exactly what staff have presented to us as this option.
So you accept option 1 in that?
That's everything that's under 5.7.
So just for clarity, Councillor King, effectively that means what's been identified as in and out in table 4 on page 10, in terms of option 1 column, regardless of what we call it, you are making that recommendation, those items are in and out.
No, I'm not. I think that council needs to go through and choose which items do come in and out. I don't think it's for... we've been presented what the last council agreed that they would go with over the next 10 years as far as the debt cap goes and as far as rates increases go. This meeting is about choosing what goes in and out. It's not about choosing option 1 and then going with what the staff are telling us. It's for us to decide which of those items and what order they come in.
Okay, so...
That's our job.
I'm not challenging that. So the question then, in terms of that recommendation, there probably needs to be more to it to give that clarity.
Yep.
That's all I'm suggesting, trying to find that point.
Yeah, I'm happy for you to help me with that.
So that would mean that, listening to what you're saying, Councillor King, that would mean that we would need to then return to the council. That motion means then that you then need some more meetings booked to go through line by line what's in and what's out. Is that listening to what you're saying? So that would have to be added into that resolution? Is that what?
Under 5.9, we've been offered 1 to 26. I think it's for councillors to choose the order, not for staff. I'm sure staff can guide us, but I think
right? So
But-
when are you anticipating we would do that? Is that,
Well, why have staff offered us two other options? If you're following through on what you're suggesting, why have we been offered options that can't work on a time basis?
I'm not too sure of the question, sorry, councillor.
The question from the chair was, when are we going to have time to work out what order we're going to put things in?
Okay.
no, when will we make time to do that? Because you're wanting the councillors to review each one of those, is that right?
I think it's our job to...
Is it just those ones, or is it the whole capital budget?
I think it's our job to decide whether community asset funding is the first thing to be struck off or not, and I don't think that...
So you're suggesting at this meeting that council puts their view on the prioritisation and then selects which items are contributed towards achieving that?
If this goes through, yes.
Yeah.
So there's
So
no
we would do
reason
that
why
in this
can't...
meeting?
Yeah, that's what I
okay.
would have
No,
thought.
that's good, I got that clear?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Mallett, seconding? Good, thank you. Yes, question, councillor?
Your Worship, I'm having a little trouble understanding what the council is achieving by the amendment. If I could ask him a question, which is, are you saying that you want to see the debt to revenue ratio reduced to under 200% by 2019? Is that what you're saying?
That's what the 2012-2022 budget said. Says.
Strategy.
That's what this...
So that's what the amendment actually means,
Yeah,
which is in contrast to the staff recommendation. Okay?
All right.
sorry, Gordon, I don't understand the
No,
question.
I think he's clear now. He was just wanting to understand what you were meaning by the motion. Okay? Are there any other questions on the wording of this and what is being proposed? No? Yes, councillor Gallagher?
I'd foreshadow an amendment if the King Mallet amendment goes down, but I think I'd just deal with that depending on the outcome of that amendment, basically in terms of the explanation of the journey which I've mentioned before.
So what's your foreshadowed
Well,
amendment?
the foreshadowed amendment would be that the draft LTP document include a comprehensive explanation as to why the majority of council feel that the 2012 to 2022 LTP debt to revenue ratio, as outlined in the pre-election document, pre-election report, is now no longer possible.
So which, just so, would that be in addition to accepting that? Because this is a motion about
No,
accepting a budget.
all I'm saying is if the King Mallet amendment is defeated,
Yeah,
then obviously I just foreshadow that I'd be wanting to add to
Oh,
the
add,
original
yes, in
Pascoe
addition.
Forsyth as an amendment, but it's obviously contingent.
yeah, so it would be another section to the motion.
Yeah, another section to the motion,
Yeah,
if the amendment's not successful.
Okay, right. Right, any other questions on the wording up there? Right. Okay, so we now debate, and I'm going to councillor Pascoe, the motion's yours. If you could speak to both a motion and amendment, if you're speaking.
Thank you. I wish to speak in favour of the motion. I think this updated 10-year plan, and councillor Mallet and myself have had significant input over the last month into that, allows council to continue its journey of fiscal prudence and the decisions of the last council, except for two outcomes. The first one being that the budget allows the city to return to operating surplus in 2016 rather than 2017, 1 year earlier. The plan to reduce debt to the predetermined rate of 200% of income will be achieved in 2021 rather than 2019, 2 years later. In all years from 2016, council operates with an annual surplus, avoiding the need to fund deficits by further borrowing. In fact, the reverse is achieved by the surplus being available to reduce debt. This is a major advance on Council's past trading activities. This Council is not bound by the fiscal decisions of the last Council. However, it is wise to pick those measures that were previously implemented and retain those that remain relevant. Furthermore, this Council is not bound by the pre-election report issued by staff in 2013. Councillor Wilson went to great lengths at the last meeting, focusing on my Facebook page in congratulating staff on the pre-election report. He took one sentence out of context because the article focused on the failure of the report to provide adequate metrics to ascertain the growth path for the incoming council. As city leaders, we need to respond to changes and not sit in the same room where council made fiscal decisions relevant to its position 3 years ago. Council, Hamilton City, must remain open for business, and there is strong evidence to support this, including, and I have these here, including the report by Professor Jackson on census metrics, which provide positive metrics for the city growth, the mean age of residents and so forth, the quarterly reports that Council commissioned from Infometrics, which provide economic and business statistics city leaders use to make current decisions. And also the most recent report from Fitch, which clearly indicates the challenges facing Hamilton City leaders in funding growth. So what happens if we're not open for business? Residential growth will occur outside the city, in Cambridge, Te Awamutu, Ngaruawahia, Ahaupo, Tamaheri. Businesses will establish and relocate to centres where population and residents are located. And yes, Councillor Gallagher, we will have trees and there will be roses blooming in the Rogers Rose Garden, but we will have more and more costs being met by fewer ratepayers. And I quote this letter that appeared in one of the newspapers over the holiday period. It was a family who had used the new playground at the Hamilton Lake. And they said, our family would like to congratulate the council for building the new lake playground. And it went on to say how wonderful it was and how the family could get together. And then it ends saying, money well spent if this is what we aim for in our city. And it's written by a Mr. Reid who lives in Ngahanapuri. So not one single red cent is being paid by Mr. Reid for the facilities and services that this council is offering. So what's in the budget? What's in the budget that I have moved? A solid, well thought through budget that works within and challenges the tight fiscal constraints this council has inherited. Secondly, an OPEX budget. While not perfect, indicates council will return to surplus earlier than predicted in 2012 and will remain in surplus for the remainder of the 10-year plan. And a CapEx budget that is almost 90% funding of infrastructure and renewals. There is none of the nice-to-have options that a growing and visionary city needs to have to promote well-being and livability. Councillors, I urge you to support my motion. I reserve the right to a right of reply.
Yes, right, thank you. Right, any other speakers? Councillor King.
I'm speaking in support of the current 2012-22 financial strategy target, which most councillors supported until a few months ago. Many of the existing councillors used this in their election manifestos 15 months ago. In the candidate information booklet that was put out, it was sent to posted to every voter in Hamilton, every registered voter. Councillor Margaret Forsyth said, I strongly support the proposal to cap city debt. I trust, Margaret, you're going to stand by your word. Margaret, Mayor Julie Hardacre, in her election advertising, her mandate that she was voted back into, when Julie Hardacre became mayor 3 years ago, city debt was heading for over 833 million. Now it's capped at 440 million. Further in this election advertising, under the last 3 years, the financial plan is in place to balance the budget, cut expenditure and cap debt at 440 million. Under my leadership, we've put a financial plan in place that caps debt. What is my plan for Hamilton? Responsible financial management. Continue with the financial plan. What is the financial plan? I believe the financial plan that she's referring to is a 10-year plan. It's signed here by Julie and the Chief Executive at the time. It says things in here like holds the total rates rise at 3.8% for existing ratepayers for each year for the next 10 years. It also says keeps debt to about 440 million for 10 years. And in the inside of here there is the graph showing exactly where debt was capped for the next 10 years. This was also updated. This was what we received last year in the annual plan, 2013-2014 plan. Once again, we've got the councillors from the last trimester there. We've got comments about holding the debt down, sticking to the plan. That was given to us less than a year ago. So other comments on here are under Julie's answers to your questions. What are your biggest priorities for the next 3 years? I will continue to deliver the financial plan. And this advertising was authorised by Julie Hardacre. In other advertising, we've got the Deputy Mayor, Gordon Chesterman, saying we've slashed debt in the 10-year plan from 833 million to 430 million. We're 3 years into the 10-year plan. We've got about 7 years to go. Councillor Angela O'Leary stated earlier in this meeting on the lost motion on capping the rate at 440 million. Quote, I didn't hear members raising the $100 million plus consequences that this resolution is going to have. In fact, Deputy Mayor Chesterman and Councillor Angela O'Leary contributed to the decisions that caused the problems that we have with the debt. They also voted for the V8s and Claudlands, which escalated the debt problem in the first place. Now we're proposing spending many more millions against what elected members have promised. Those who fail to learn from the mistakes of history are doomed to repeat them. How can our city prosper when our civic leaders break their promises? Julie Hardacre, Deputy Mayor Gordon Chesterman and Councillor Angela Larry were part of the council.
Second.
We're part of the council that approved the current financial strategy to cap debt and to hold rates at 3.8% rates increases. You've all already shown your indicated that you intend to break that promise. urge you to please reconsider. Please be people of your word. Please honour your promises. Promises that you made to the citizens of Hamilton 15 months ago, and voters who will vote again in a year's time, next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, anyone else? No? Right. Oh, sorry, Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Your Worship. There are many cuts to services that have been made by this council that I don't support. And I suspect that if Councillors King and Mallett had their way, my thoughts as to the outcomes would be quite similar. You're just woken up to that, Gary, good. But faced with that sort of unpalatable choice of cuts either way to what I regard as essential services, I would rather at least stick with what had been promised to ratepayers and voters, even if I didn't support that initially. When I look at some of the things that this council has already voted for, some of the nice-to-have things, like expenditure on stadiums and events, compared with nickel and dime cuts to community services, for example, I can't support Councillor Pascoe's and the Mayor's increases in spending that they're proposing through this resolution. Councillor Pascoe says, and I'm pretty near quoting him, that this council should not be bound by decisions of previous councils. That may be legally true, but is it morally good? Is it politically wise? In fact, I would say it's a classic politician's excuse for breaking an election promise that we heard from Councillor Pascoe. He says that we won't be open for business if we follow the original financial strategy of the 2012-22 LTP. That's rubbish. He says that will mean that there are developments happening in areas around the city and not in the city. We all know that that's rubbish. There are already developments, residential and business-wise, happening around the city right now and have been for many years, regardless of the financial strategy of this council. We don't actually have the land to do much more here anyway, and I think anyone that looks at a map would know that. This city will be open for business. The conditions may vary slightly from time to time. That's the worst that will happen. Don't be put off by the scaremongering. I think if you make an election promise, I believe you're honour bound to keep it. It's not an election promise that I made, but I recognise that the majority of voters voted with that well and truly in mind. And I would rather be consistent with that than go down the track of just spending more, exceeding limits when it suits us, because I think that's what's happening at the moment.
Right, any other speakers? No? Right, okay, we're going to vote on the amendment. The amendment first is what we're voting on.
Rob's not sure what he's voting for.
The amendment is lost, 7 votes against, 5 for.
Thank you. Councillor Gallagher, did you
Yes,
get your wording? Did you
For
get your wording?
my amendment, I'll just go through it as I just want to check that the draft LTP document include a comprehensive explanation as to why Council has resolved to abandon the debt to revenue ratio as outlined in the 2012-2022 LTP and the pre-election report 2013.
So Councillors Pascoe and Forsyth, I mean, that's a communication requirement. Are you comfortable to add that into your motion? I mean, I'm not sure whether Councillor Gallagher spoke to you and asked you to do that, but are you happy to add that into your motion?
Through you, Your Worship, from a staff point of view, that's
It's a
a
legal
very,
requirement.
very straightforward, and we intended to do that, so we have no issue with that. and we can easily achieve that outcome.
Well, I'm happy to withdraw. If you've made that statement, I'm happy just to withdraw the motion because I'm not. You've clearly said as CEO that your understanding is that as part of the explanatory notes that will be part of it. And I'll be happy. I'll withdraw my motion if that's your advice to us.
It's a requirement to explain, so.
Yeah,
Are
yeah,
you,
okay.
okay, so we're not having that
That's
now?
fine. I won't.
Oh.
Sorry, could I ask on that aspect, the wording aspect, whether that wording will come to us in a draft form as one of the meetings coming up?
So the consultation document will be tabled on 25th of February, so it'll be part of the agenda pack for that. So the councillors will have an opportunity to view the wording of that document as well as infrastructure strategy at that point in time as well.
Thank you.
It's fine. Motion withdrawn.
Right, okay, so we're voting on the motion now as it was, right?
Motion carried, 7 votes for and 5
Right,
against.
thank you. Okay, we're adjourned for morning tea. We'll be back at 5.